A lot of people have been asking for it, and MOZA delivered a cheap or cheap-ish force feedback joystick. But what corners have they cut to hit this more budget-friendly price? And most importantly, is it still what you'd call a good force feedback experience? MOZA did send the AB6 out for testing and review and won't see any of this before it goes live. The most important thing first, the price. This is the calling card for this joystick. It's the cheapest force feedback stick you can get right now, coming in at $400 US. Included with that is the base, of course, then the stick and the mounting clamp. Everything you need to get started. Now that $400 is still a fair chunk of cash, but if we're going to compare it to the others on the market, the landscape looks like this. Its big brother, the AB9, is $549 US for the base only. Add another $150 for a stick. Then there's the FF Beast, starting at around $800 US base only. And finally, the most expensive one of them all, the Brunner. So that's where we're at right now, at least until WinWing enters the market. Drop me a comment and let me know if you'll be holding out for WinWing's force feedback stick. So keeping that price in mind, we flow on to the design and build quality. This is where I think the AB6 is an absolute winner. It just looks and feels right. You can see it here next to the AB9, and the size difference is, well, it's huge. The new AB6 is much, much smaller. I guess I got so used to the AB9, I was genuinely gobsmacked when I pulled this little thing out of the box. Also, something the AB9 never had, you get these 8 programmable buttons on the base with RGB lighting. Then there's 2 axis controls on the base itself. Now, if you've already got a throttle, you might not touch these much, but they're there if you need them. Perfect for things like FOV adjustment or zoom. And both the axes on these are really quite stunning. Unbelievably smooth with a bit of weight to them. Really more than I would expect on something at this price. Then we have the metal surround for the base. And again, this has a high quality feel to it, but on top it's finished with plastic. The quality is good here, and it's sort of what I would expect for something in this price range. As far as the clamp goes, which again is included, I'm kind of going against the grain here from what everyone else is saying, but it's just a bit average. Nothing really to complain about other than the fact that you have to mount the base quite far out on the clamp because of the cables that are going to come out this portion of the base. Based on that, it does introduce a little bit of leverage, which induces a bit of movement. That means inevitably you will lose some of the force feedback effects into the actual clamp itself, rather than delivering it all to your hands. But let's keep things in perspective here. For the price, it's absolutely adequate. Moving on to the stick. It never really wowed me, not like the MH16 did. It's just slightly above average in terms of quality, similar to some of the Virpil and VKB plastic sticks. It's a generic military design with, I would say, a really neat finish, but it's missing a brake lever. However, the button layout is good, and the buttons and the trigger do punch above their weight in terms of feel. It's got everything you might need for the likes of War Thunder and DCS, other than that brake lever that I mentioned earlier. It's a good size in my hand, which is about 9.5 inches pinky to thumb tip. The weight on the yaw axis is also, I would say, just right. Some sticks implement this feature I feel are too light, and it's all too easy to indirectly move it. MOZA, in this instance, I think they've nailed it. And if you don't want to use the rudder function, you just lock it off with the 2 screws at the base of the stick. Before we move on, it's worth mentioning that you can use any stick with this connection type. I don't know if you can see it and that camera there, it's like a kind of standard Thrustmaster connection. And also, MOZA do have an Airbus stick, but it's not the captain's side, it's a right-handed stick, which I actually find useful for warbirds. So it's the cheapest force feedback and stick on the market. The design and build quality are great in most places, but here's the big question. How does it feel? That is the most important part. Straight away, you can tell that this is a gear-driven force feedback base. You can feel the cogging in both axes. It's a muted cogging, and at the same time, it all fits with the fact that this is a budget force feedback joystick. You could almost say it feels like one of those Logitech G29 racing wheels, but smoother and finer in a way. If you know racing wheels, it's a difference between belt-driven and gear-driven force feedback. For example, the AB9 feels belt-driven and buttery smooth, and the AB6 feels gear-driven. Now, does that mild cogging detract from anything when actually flying? Well, it depends on what you're flying. Once that force feedback is activated, you won't be paying much attention to it. In a fighter jet where you're making quick, larger movements, you're probably not going to notice it at all. But if you're doing precision approaches in something like an Airbus where you're making tiny, tiny corrections, you might be more aware of it. It's definitely something to keep in mind. Now, one more thing, this base is putting out 4.4 Newton meters of continuous torque, with peaks of up to 6 Newton meters combined. Compare that to something like the AB9 at 12 Newton meters, and yeah, there is a difference. But here's the thing. Do you actually need all that power? If you're flying heavy warbirds or GA aircraft where you're wrestling with aerodynamic forces, that extra muscle might matter. So it really comes down to what you fly. Although for most people, especially if you're new to force feedback, and I think that's where this kind of comes in, if you're new to force feedback, the AB6 has enough grunt to keep you happy. But if you've had your hands on an AB9 before and are hoping that this will deliver something close-ish, it doesn't. However, the whole point of a force feedback stick is to be able to replicate the feel of almost any plane out there. And disregarding the power, which we just talked about, the AB6 does just as well as its big brother in this regard. You can tune almost anything into the feel of this stick, from the engine vibration and buffeting effects to the weight of the elevator and ailerons as the air passes over the wing. There are so many extra effects too, like gunfire vibration, canopy opening and damage. But this all depends on the game and what telemetry the game is outputting. I particularly like the buffeting effects and the autopilot and trim effects in Microsoft Flight Simulator. If there's a specific flight sim you play like DCS or War Thunder, then definitely do a bit of research to see which effects are supported. And with the likes of DCS, effects will even be module dependent. So it's not as clear cut as just saying everything works. And that takes me to the software. MOZA have been banging out updates with this. And the MOZA cockpit software just keeps getting better. You can set up profiles for each individual plane and game, but it's missing something. I would love to see a few MOZA approved or pilot approved profiles created by real life pilots for some of the popular planes like the Airbus or the SR-22 or Cessna 172. I think that would immensely improve the user experience, especially in the beginning when you just want to get up and running. Pushing that aside though, the software just gets deeper and deeper. You might feel a little overwhelmed at first. It just takes a few good hours of getting your hands dirty and trying everything out. So let's recap the great stuff. Size and form factor. It's small and it's compact. The price and value for money, that's a given. The entire package, the clamp, the stick and the base, that ties back to the value. The 8 programmable buttons on the base and the 2 axes. And at this point, you have to say the software. Now the things that might make you want to think twice. That mild cogging on both the main axes, it's not a deal breaker, but it's more noticeable when you're making those really precise inputs. The lower power at 4.4 Newton meters continuous torque is fine for most flying, but if you're after heavy warbird forces or prefer a really strong feedback, you're probably going to want more than this can deliver. What you're flying, I think, matters. If you do a lot of precision work, the gear-driven feel might bug you a little bit, but I don't think it's something that you wouldn't get used to. I think the real question for this force feedback base and stick, and the way it's priced, is should I opt for a non-force feedback stick like an Ava or a Virpil Warbird, which when it comes down to it, have a smoother, more precise feel for slightly less money? Or is this my chance to dive into force feedback? In terms of pure enjoyment, the feedback you get, whether that's in DCS, Flight Simulator or X-Plane, at a basic level, the enjoyment factor is absolutely there. You might feel you lose a bit of precision input because of that gear-driven mechanism, but for me, I could put up with it simply for the sheer wealth of effects and profiles that can be applied to this. You can have different profiles for every plane you fly across all the different sims. I think MOZA have made a great move bringing the price dramatically down on something like this. I think the AB6 is a solid effort and the value for money is there. But to get the most out of it, you either need a very solid desk or a dedicated cockpit to make sure all of those effects are actually translated into your hands. At the same time, the included clamp, it's adequate. But yeah, for $400, you're getting a proper force feedback experience. At this price, I don't think I could recommend any type of standard stick against this. It's just too much fun.